They told her it was just a political marriage, but the palace systems didn't freeze for politics. The hall of Vera Prime stretched like a living cathedral of glass and light, its walls humming softly, as if the structure itself were listening, recording, judging. Queen Seraphina stood at the center of it all, unmoving, flawless, distant, her long silver-lined ears angled in perfect neutrality as dignitaries from 12 systems watched in careful silence. Beside her stood the human, Ethan Blake, a name that meant nothing here. A man who looked like he had wandered into the wrong universe and decided to stay out of politeness. His suit fit well enough, though the cuff on his right sleeve sat half an inch too loose, like he didn't quite believe in ceremony. He glanced around once, taking in the floating chandeliers that adjusted brightness based on emotional tension, the guards whose armor reflected not light but intent, the quiet expectation pressing down like gravity set a little too high. "Nice place," he murmured under his breath, voice dry, almost amused, as if he were commenting on a diner instead of an interstellar throne hall. No one laughed. They weren't supposed to. Seraphina did not look at him. Not once. This was a treaty, a calculation, a solution to a border dispute that had lasted 19 standard years and cost more resources than anyone was willing to admit publicly. Marriage was simply the cleanest equation. She had agreed because it was efficient, because it stabilized variables, because emotions, as she had learned early, were unreliable data points. The officiator began speaking, his voice layered through translation fields that smoothed meaning across species, each word landing with ceremonial precision. Ethan listened with the expression of someone following instructions he had not been given in advance. He nodded once, a fraction too late, then adjusted his stance, weight shifting slightly to his left foot. Comfortable, observant, not impressed. That, more than anything, drew the first flicker of attention. Seraphina's gaze moved, just slightly, enough to register him as something other than furniture. The chandeliers dimmed by a degree, reacting to a change no one had announced. Somewhere along the perimeter, a court advisor leaned toward another and whispered something that never quite formed into sound. The air shifted. Ethan exhaled softly, then reached up, almost absently, and brushed his fingers against the edge of a hovering interface panel that had drifted half an inch out of alignment. He didn't look at it directly, didn't ask permission, just corrected it. The panel snapped back into place with a faint, obedient hum. The system adjusted, then paused. Not malfunctioning, not failing, pausing, as if reconsidering something it thought it understood. Seraphina turned fully this time. Her eyes met his. For the first time since the ceremony began, the room felt like it had forgotten how to breathe. "Human," she said, her voice calm, precise, carrying the weight of command without raising volume. "Who are you?" Ethan blinked once, like the question had arrived earlier than expected. He glanced at the panel, then back at her, a small crease forming at his brow. Not fear, not confusion, something closer to mild inconvenience. "That depends," he said quietly. "Are you asking for the version written in your treaty, or the one your system just recognized?" Silence didn't fall. It locked into place. The chandeliers stilled. The guard stopped adjusting. Even the translation field hesitated, as if unsure whether it was allowed to carry what came next. And for the first time, Queen Seraphina Vera looked at her husband not as a political solution, but as a problem she had not prepared for. The silence did not break, it deepened, like the room itself had decided to listen more carefully rather than react. And that was worse, because on Vera Prime silence was never empty. It was always processing, always recalculating. The palace system flickered again, not visibly this time, but subtly, like a breath held half a second too long. And across the chamber several translucent data threads shimmered into existence, uninvited, drifting toward Ethan Blake as if drawn by a gravity no one had authorized. Seraphina did not move, but her ears shifted forward by a fraction, the smallest betrayal of attention, and in her world, that fraction meant everything. "Explain," she said, not louder, not harsher, but the word landed with the weight of command that had shaped entire star systems. Ethan glanced at the drifting threads, then at her, then back at the threads again, as if deciding which problem to deal with first. "I was hoping we could finish the ceremony before the existential crisis," he said lightly, his tone carrying that same dry edge, as though palace systems questioning reality were a mild scheduling inconvenience. No one smiled. The officiator had stopped speaking entirely, frozen mid-sentence, his translation field hovering uncertainly around words it no longer trusted. Somewhere behind the royal dais, a council member shifted his stance, the soft click of his boots echoing far louder than it should have, then stopping abruptly as if sound itself had reconsidered its role. Serafina stepped closer, one precise movement, measured in inches but felt across the entire hall, and now she stood within arm's reach of the human she had agreed to marry without ever intending to know. Up close, he did not change. That was the anomaly. Most beings adjusted under her presence, posture tightening, breath altering, something in them acknowledging the weight she carried. Ethan Blake remained steady, not defiant, not submissive, just present, like he had already decided where he belonged and was waiting for the universe to catch up. "My system does not recognize without cause," she said, her gaze fixed on him, searching for fracture points, inconsistencies, anything that could be categorized and contained. "It is responding to you as if you are already part of this structure." Ethan considered that, tilting his head slightly, as if the idea amused him more than it concerned him. "That is usually a bad sign," he admitted. The data threads pulsed brighter. A soft tone moved through the floor, low and resonant, the kind of sound that normally accompanied deep archive access, not wedding ceremonies. Several guards turned their heads in unison, their armor adjusting in quiet synchronization, not aggressive, not yet, but attentive in a way that suggested protocol was beginning to stretch. Serafina noticed everything. The shift in the guards, the system tone, the way the advisors had stopped whispering entirely, and most of all, the way the palace itself seemed to be orienting around him, like a compass recalibrating to a new north. "You are not in any registry I approved," she said. Ethan exhaled softly, almost apologetically, and for a moment his gaze moved past her, toward the far wall where the oldest archive interface rested, dormant for decades, its surface dark and uninterested in the present. Then, slowly it lit up. Not triggered, not commanded. It woke. A line of symbols appeared, ancient, precise, and completely outside the active language set of the Empire. The translation field did not even attempt to interpret it. It simply dimmed as if acknowledging its own limitations. Serafina's breath stilled. Her ears locked forward. She knew that script, not because she had studied it, but because she had been told it should never appear again. Ethan looked back at her, and for the first time there was something different in his expression, not humor, not discomfort, something quieter, older. "I did not think it would still respond," he said. The archive brightened. The symbols rearranged. And then, with calm, undeniable certainty, the system spoke, not through translation, but directly into the space itself. Identification confirmed. The hall did not react. It could not, because no one there knew what had just been confirmed, only that something impossible had just become official, and standing at the center of it, Queen Serafina realized that whatever this marriage was supposed to be, it had already stopped following the rules. No one in the hall moved because movement would have required understanding, and understanding had just become optional. The archive light did not flicker or hesitate. It stabilized, bright and deliberate, as if it had finally found something it had been waiting for longer than anyone in the room had been alive. Serafina did not look away from Ethan, but her awareness expanded outward, tracking everything at once, the guards holding position without receiving orders, the advisors frozen between protocol and instinct. The translation field dimmed like it had stepped aside out of respect. "Identification of what?" she asked, her voice quieter now, not weaker, but more precise, like she was narrowing a question to its most dangerous form. Ethan glanced toward the archive again, and for a moment he seemed almost reluctant, like someone recognizing a door he had spent years avoiding. "That is the part one was hoping to delay," he said, his tone still light, but thinner now, stretched across something heavier beneath it. The symbols on the archive shifted, reorganizing themselves into patterns that carried weight even without translation, the kind of structure that suggested intent rather than decoration. A second tone resonated through the floor, deeper this time, and several dormant systems across the hall began to wake in sequence, subtle changes most would miss. But Serafina did not miss anything. She took another step closer, closing the distance completely, and now she could see the details she had ignored before, the faint scar near his jaw that matched no known military record, the way his eyes tracked movement not as a guest, but as someone familiar with layered systems, the absence of reaction to pressure that should have unsettled him. "You are not surprised," she said. It was not a question. Ethan met her gaze, and for the first time, the humor softened into something more honest. "I am," he said quietly, "just not in the way you think." Behind them, one of the council members found his voice, though it came out thinner than intended. "Your Majesty, this is a breach of ceremonial integrity," he said, as if naming the situation might reduce it to something manageable. Serafina did not turn. "No," she replied calmly. "This is something else." The archive brightened again, and a new line of symbols appeared, longer, more complex, and this time the palace did not remain silent. A soft, layered voice emerged, not from a single source but from the structure itself, carried through walls, floor, and air alike. Lineage reference detected. The words did not echo. They settled. The kind of statement that did not need repetition because it did not expect disagreement. Ethan closed his eyes for half a second, just long enough to suggest recognition, then opened them again with a small exhale. "That is inconvenient," he muttered. Serafina's ears shifted sharply forward, the first clear break from her controlled composure. "Lineage," she repeated. "You are not registered. There is no record." Ethan gave a small, almost apologetic shrug. "That would be because the record predates your registry." Silence tightened. Not confusion now, but something closer to realization beginning at the edges. The archive responded instantly, projecting a faint overlay of data into the air between them, not detailed, not complete, just enough to confirm alignment with something ancient, something foundational. Several of the oldest symbols in Vera history pulsed once, then again, syncing with his presence like a system recognizing its original key. Serafina felt it then, not emotion, not yet, but a shift in position, like the ground beneath a structure adjusting its foundation. The human she had agreed to marry as a political necessity was standing in front of her as a variable that could not be reduced, categorized, or dismissed. "Why are you here?" she asked, and this time the question carried something new, not command, not suspicion, something closer to intent. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, the noise of the hall fading into something distant, irrelevant. "Honestly," he said, "I thought I was just here to get married." The corner of her mouth almost moved, not quite a smile, but something dangerously close, and around them, the palace continued to recalibrate, as if quietly acknowledging that whatever had just been revealed was only the beginning. The palace did not return to normal because normal no longer applied. It adapted, slowly, carefully, like something ancient adjusting to a forgotten command that had suddenly become relevant again, and that was what unsettled Serafina most. Not the words, not the archive, but the way the system itself had chosen a side without asking her. "Suspend external access," she said quietly, and the order moved through the hall without resistance. Doors sealing, communication threads dimming, the outside universe politely excluded from whatever this had become. The council reacted a heartbeat too late, exchanging glances that carried more uncertainty than authority, because for the first time, the queen had not looked to them for confirmation. Ethan noticed that. He noticed everything. "That feels official," he said, glancing at the sealed entrances as if checking whether he had just been promoted or quietly contained. No one answered him. Serafina stepped back half a pace, not retreating, recalibrating, creating space not for distance, but for perspective, her gaze shifting briefly to the hovering data before returning to him with sharper focus. "You said the record predates my registry," she said. "That implies origin-level access." Ethan tilted his head slightly, considering the phrasing. "That implies someone built the registry on top of something older," he replied. A pause followed, deliberate, heavy, the kind that forced every mind in the room to rearrange what it thought it understood about its own foundation. One of the senior advisors inhaled sharply, then stopped himself, as if even breathing too loudly might interfere with whatever process had begun. The archive pulsed again, not brighter, but deeper, like it was no longer displaying information but remembering it, and this time the projection shifted closer to Ethan, aligning itself to his position with quiet certainty. Serafina saw it clearly now, the way the system oriented toward him not as a subject, not as an anomaly, but as a reference point. That was not recognition. That was alignment. You did not come here by accident, she said. Ethan's expression did not change immediately, which in itself was an answer. He looked at the projection, then at her, then somewhere just past her shoulder, like he was measuring how much of the truth the room could handle before it broke something important. I came here because I was asked, he said finally. The words landed differently than anything else he had said. Not defensive, not casual, simple. That made them heavier. Serafina's ears angled forward again, fully now, abandoning neutrality in favor of a tension that bordered on intensity. By whom? She asked. The palace did not wait for him to answer. A new sequence appeared across the archive, older still, stripped of modern structure, raw in a way that suggested it had never been meant for interpretation, only for execution. The translation field did not attempt to engage. It remained dim, respectfully silent, as if acknowledging that this was not a language it had the authority to touch. Ethan exhaled slowly, and for the first time since the ceremony began, there was no trace of humor left. That, he said, glancing at the sequence, is complicated. A faint sound moved through the hall, not mechanical, not environmental, something closer to resonance, like the building itself had just agreed with him. Serafina stepped forward again, closing the distance once more, but this time the movement was different, not commanding, not testing, intentional. Then simplify it, she said. Ethan looked at her, really looked this time, and whatever calculation he had been running seemed to reach a conclusion. All right, he said quietly. Your empire was not the first to stand here. The words settled into the space between them, and even before the implications could fully form, the archive responded, the ancient sequence locking into place, confirming not just his presence, but the truth behind it. And for the first time since she had taken the throne, Queen Serafina felt something she had not prepared for, not fear, not doubt, but the unmistakable sensation that the ground beneath her authority had just revealed a deeper layer she had never been meant to see. The words did not echo, they settled, and once they settled they did not move again, like something placed into the foundation rather than spoken into the air, and for the first time since the ceremony began, no one in the hall tried to reinterpret what they had just heard. Serafina stood perfectly still, but her awareness shifted inward, recalculating every assumption she had built her rule upon. Because if what he said was true, then her empire was not the origin, it was a continuation, and that meant someone, somewhere, had written the first line before her people ever arrived. Clarify, she said, and the word carried less command now and more intent, as if she was no longer directing the moment, but stepping into it. Ethan exhaled slowly, not hesitating, not rushing, just choosing his next words with the care of someone who understood that once said, they could not be contained again. The systems here, he said, glancing briefly at the glowing archive, they are not reacting to me as an outsider. They are reacting like I am, part of their original parameters. A faint shift moved through the chamber, not visible, but felt, like the structure itself acknowledging the accuracy of the statement without needing to confirm it aloud. One of the senior advisors finally stepped forward, unable to remain silent any longer, his voice controlled but strained at the edges. That is not possible, he said. All core systems were built under Vera authority. Ethan looked at him, not dismissive, not confrontational, just patient. Documented under Vera authority, he corrected gently. The distinction landed harder than any argument. The advisor stopped speaking, not because he agreed, but because he no longer knew how to disagree. Serafina's gaze did not leave Ethan, but she registered everything. The way the council had shifted from certainty to hesitation, the way the palace systems had not corrected him, the way silence now carried weight instead of control. If what you are saying is true, she said slowly, then this structure predates my entire civilization. Ethan nodded once. By more than a few years. That was the closest he came to understatement, and it carried just enough dry humor to soften the edge without removing it. The archive pulsed again, and this time the projection expanded outward, revealing fragments of data not as information but as memory, incomplete, layered, and far older than anything in active circulation. Serafina stepped closer to it without realizing she had moved, her attention drawn not by curiosity alone, but by recognition she could not explain, like seeing a pattern she had always known but never consciously understood. Why would it respond? To you? She asked, quieter now, almost to herself. Ethan followed her gaze, watching the ancient sequences align and stabilize in his presence. Because whoever built this, he said, built it to recognize something specific. He paused, just long enough for the implication to begin forming before he finished it. And for some reason, I match it. The room did not react, but the absence of reaction was louder than any response could have been. The guards remained still, the council remained silent, the systems remained focused, all of it converging on a single point that had not existed in their models an hour ago. Serafina turned back to him, and this time there was no distance in her gaze, no dismissal, no assumption, only focus sharpened by something new, something that felt dangerously close to understanding. You said you were asked to come here, she said. If this is not coincidence, then this was arranged. Ethan met her eyes, and for a moment, the weight of everything that had not yet been said settled between them. Yes, he said quietly. It was. The palace hummed, low and steady, like a system approaching a threshold it had been designed to reach, but never expected to encounter again. And as the ancient archive continued to align itself around him, Queen Serafina realized that this marriage had never been a political solution. It had been an activation, and she had just stepped into something far older than her throne. The word activation did not fade. It lingered, not in the air, but in the way every system in the palace had subtly shifted into alignment, like a machine that had been waiting for a missing component and had just found it. Serafina felt it before she saw it, a quiet recalibration beneath her feet, the gravitic plates adjusting by a fraction, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough to tell her the palace was no longer responding to her alone. That had never happened before. What does it activate? She asked, and this time there was no attempt to mask the weight behind the question, because whatever this was, it had already moved beyond ceremony, beyond politics, beyond anything she had prepared for. Ethan glanced at the surrounding systems, watching the slow synchronization as if he were listening to something no one else could hear. I am not completely sure, he admitted, and the honesty in that answer carried more tension than any confident claim could have. A faint ripple passed through the archive, and the projection shifted again, no longer just displaying fragments, but assembling them, piece by piece, like a memory being reconstructed in real time. Lines connected, symbols aligned, patterns emerged that had never been visible before, not because they were hidden, but because no one had ever triggered the conditions to reveal them. Serafina stepped closer to the projection, drawn in despite herself, her eyes tracking the formation with precision, absorbing structure, intent, sequence. This is not data storage, she said slowly. This is the framework. Ethan nodded once, watching her recognize it. Yes, he said, not a record of what was built, a guide for what comes next. The implications settled heavily between them. One of the council members took a step forward, then stopped, as if unsure whether he was still authorized to move within his own authority. Your Majesty, he began, voice tight with controlled urgency. This process should be halted until it can be properly analyzed. Serafina did not look at him. It has already begun, she replied calmly, and it does not appear to require our permission. That was the moment the room fully understood its position, not in control, not even in negotiation, but in observation. Ethan shifted his stance slightly, his gaze following a new sequence forming at the center of the projection, something more focused now, more deliberate. There is something else, he said quietly. Serafina turned back to him immediately. What? He hesitated, not out of fear, but calculation, as if deciding how much of the truth would change the situation versus how much would break it. This was not just about recognition, he said. It was about compatibility. The word landed differently. Recognition could be passive. Compatibility implied purpose. The archive responded instantly, highlighting a specific section of the emerging framework, and this time the palace did not remain silent. A soft tone, higher now, more precise, resonated through the chamber, followed by a clear, unmistakable statement that did not rely on translation. Dual access condition approaching threshold. Seraphina's breath stilled, not visibly, but internally, the way it did when something shifted from theory into reality. Dual, she repeated. Her gaze moved from the projection to Ethan, then back again, the connection forming faster than she could suppress it. This requires more than one input. Ethan met her eyes, and there was no humor left now, no deflection, only clarity. Yes, he said. The silence that followed was absolute, not empty, but complete, as if the entire palace had paused at the edge of something irreversible. Seraphina looked at her hand without meaning to, then at his, then back at the projection where two distinct markers had begun to form, one already aligned with him, the other, waiting. The system had not chosen randomly. It had chosen structure. It had chosen design. And now it was waiting for completion. Ethan exhaled slowly, the faintest trace of something uncertain finally breaking through his otherwise steady composure. I think, he said carefully, this is the part where the marriage actually matters. The word mattered did not feel symbolic anymore. It felt mechanical, precise, like a missing instruction finally placed into a system that had been waiting long enough to forget it was incomplete. Seraphina did not respond immediately, because responding would have implied uncertainty, and uncertainty was something she had spent her entire reign eliminating. But this was different. This was not a variable she could control. It was a condition she had just become part of. Her gaze moved from the projection to Ethan's hand again, then back to his face, searching not for answers, but for alignment, for confirmation that this was not a coincidence layered into something larger, but something intentional from the beginning. You knew, she said quietly. It was not accusation. It was recognition. Ethan did not deny it. He did not confirm it either. He simply held her gaze with a steadiness that no longer looked accidental. I suspected, he said, and the difference between knowing and suspecting carried just enough truth to make the answer honest without making it complete. The projection pulsed again, and the second marker intensified, no longer passive, no longer waiting without direction. It began to synchronize with her presence, slowly at first, then with increasing certainty, as if the system had already decided and was now simply waiting for her to accept it. A soft tone moved through the hall, higher now, sharper, like a signal reaching clarity after long interference. Dual access condition nearing fulfillment. The words settled into the chamber without resistance. No one spoke. No one moved. Because now the meaning was no longer abstract. It was immediate. It required action. Seraphina felt the shift before she understood it. Not physical, not visible, but structural. Like her position in the room had subtly changed, no longer at the center by authority, but at the center by necessity. That was new. That was dangerous. And yet, she did not step back. Instead, she stepped forward. The distance between her and Ethan closed completely, not ceremonial, not symbolic, but exact, deliberate, like aligning two components that had been designed to meet. The guards did not intervene. The council did not speak. Even the palace systems seemed to quiet, as if observing a threshold they were not allowed to interrupt. Seraphina lifted her hand, not quickly, not hesitantly, but with the same controlled precision she used in every decision that defined her rule. For a fraction of a second, her fingers hovered in the space between them. That fraction carried more weight than any declaration. Ethan did not move to meet her. He did not retreat. He simply remained, steady, allowing the choice to remain hers. That, more than anything, shifted something in her perception. He was not guiding this. He was part of it. The distinction mattered. Her fingers touched his. The contact was light, almost nothing, and yet the effect was immediate. The projection flared, not violently, but with clarity, lines locking into place, symbols stabilizing into structure, the framework completing a sequence that had remained dormant for longer than memory could measure. A low resonance moved through the entire palace, deeper than before, not a warning, not an alarm, but a confirmation. Dual access confirmed. The words did not need to be spoken loudly. They did not need to repeat. The system had reached its condition. The hall remained silent, but the silence had changed again, no longer tense, no longer uncertain, but aware, as if everyone present had just witnessed something they would not fully understand for years. Seraphina did not pull her hand away immediately. Her gaze remained on Ethan, closer now than it had ever been, searching not for explanation, but for meaning within what had just been set into motion. This was not arranged for politics, she said quietly. It was not a question anymore. Ethan exhaled softly, the faintest hint of that dry humor returning, though tempered now by something deeper. No, he said. It really was not. And as the ancient system continued to stabilize around them, the marriage that had begun as a solution had just become something else entirely, something designed, something activated, and something neither of them could walk away from now that it had begun. The moment their hands separated, the system did not power down, it deepened, like a process that had finally received authorization and no longer needed to ask for permission to continue. The projection between them expanded outward in slow, deliberate layers, no longer fragmented, no longer uncertain, but structured with an elegance that suggested it had always existed this way and had simply been waiting to be seen. Serafina remained still, but her awareness sharpened, tracking the changes with precision, each new alignment revealing not just information but intention, design layered within design. This is not activation, she said quietly, her voice steady but lower now, more focused. This is initialization. Ethan followed the projection as it unfolded, his expression shifting into something that resembled recognition more than surprise. That sounds more accurate, he admitted. The palace responded in kind, subtle systems synchronizing in sequence, corridors adjusting energy flow, defensive grids recalibrating not outward but inward, as if redefining what they were meant to protect. Across the hall, the council no longer pretended to understand, their silence no longer controlled but enforced by the realization that this had moved beyond their authority entirely. One of the advisors took a careful step back, not retreating, but acknowledging a boundary that had just appeared without warning. Serafina noticed, and for the first time, she did not correct it. Her attention remained on Ethan, but it was no longer the distant observation of a ruler evaluating an unknown variable. It was direct, deliberate, searching for alignment within something that had already begun to include her. You said this was arranged, she said. Then whoever arranged it knew this would happen. Ethan nodded once, his gaze lowering briefly to the projection before returning to her. Yes, he said. They did. The words carried weight, not because of what they revealed, but because of what they implied, that this moment, this convergence, had been anticipated long before either of them had a say in it. The projection shifted again, focusing now into a central structure, something less abstract, more defined, a configuration that resembled neither weapon nor archive, but something in between, a system designed not just to store or defend, but to guide. Serafina stepped closer to it, drawn by the precision of its design, her eyes narrowing slightly as patterns resolved into sequences she could almost understand. This is directional, she said slowly. It is pointing somewhere. Ethan glanced at the forming structure and gave a quiet exhale. Of course it is, he said. It would not go through all this just to say hello. A faint trace of dry humor returned, but it did not break the tension. It balanced it, grounding the moment without diminishing its scale. The palace hummed again, softer now, more stable, as if it had completed its initial phase and was transitioning into something more sustained. Then the structure shifted once more, and a new layer revealed itself, not symbols this time, but coordinates, precise, distant, and unmistakably real. The hall did not react immediately, but the implications settled quickly, faster than before, because now the unknown had direction. Serafina turned to Ethan, her gaze sharper than it had ever been. Where does it lead? She asked. Ethan looked at the coordinates, then back at her, and for a moment, something like hesitation passed through him. Not doubt, but the awareness of consequence. Somewhere older than this, he said quietly. Somewhere that built this. The words did not echo. They did not need to. The palace had already begun to adjust, systems aligning not just around them, but towards something beyond them. And as the coordinates stabilized into clarity, Queen Serafina realized that whatever had just begun inside her hall was no longer contained within it. It was pointing outward, towards something waiting far beyond her empire, something that had just called them both to it. The coordinates did not blink or fade. They held steady in the center of the projection, precise to a level that suggested intent rather than discovery. And as they stabilized, The palace itself began to orient around them, not physically, but systemically, like every process had quietly agreed that this point in space now mattered more than anything within the hall. Serafina did not move at first, because movement would have implied reaction, and she was no longer reacting. She was assessing, recalculating the scale of what stood in front of her, not just a man, not just a system, but a directive that reached beyond her authority. "You are saying this is a destination," she said, her voice steady, controlled, but carrying a new weight, something that acknowledged consequence rather than dismissed it. Ethan looked at the coordinates again, then at her. His expression settled into something clear, resolved, the kind of look that came when uncertainty had been replaced by inevitability. "I am saying it was always meant to be," he replied. The words did not challenge her authority, but they did not defer to it either, and that distinction landed quietly but firmly between them. The projection pulsed once more, and this time the structure around the coordinates expanded, revealing not just location, but pathway, a sequence of transitions, routes that did not exist in standard navigation systems, layered beneath known space, like hidden architecture waiting to be used. One of the senior advisors finally stepped forward again, his voice lower now, less certain. "Your Majesty, if this leads beyond mapped territory, then we are dealing with unknown variables on an unprecedented scale." Serafina did not turn toward him. "We already are," she said calmly. That ended the discussion. The palace hummed, not with tension now, but with readiness, as if systems that had been dormant for generations were quietly coming online, not because they were ordered to, but because they had recognized a condition they were designed to respond to. Ethan shifted slightly beside her, glancing at the expanding pathways with a thoughtful expression. "It is not just a destination," he said. "It is a test." Serafina's gaze sharpened immediately. "Explain." Ethan exhaled slowly, the faintest trace of his earlier dry tone returning, though now it carried something steadier beneath it. "Nothing built like this points somewhere without expecting something in return," he said. "If it is asking us to go, it is also waiting to see if we can." The implication settled deeper than anything before it. Not an invitation, not a command, a condition. Serafina looked at the coordinates again, then at the pathways, then back at Ethan, and in that moment, something shifted completely, not in the palace, not in the system, but in her. She was no longer evaluating whether this should be allowed. She was deciding whether it would be claimed. "Prepare a vessel," she said, her voice calm, absolute, carrying across the hall with the same authority that had shaped her empire, but now directed towards something far beyond it. The council did not hesitate this time. They moved. Orders began to form. Systems responded. The palace, which had once centered entirely around her rule, now aligned with her decision. Ethan watched her for a moment, then gave a small nod, almost approving, though he did not say it out loud. "You are taking this well," he said quietly. Serafina turned to him, and for the first time, there was no distance left in her gaze, no assumption, no dismissal, only clarity and something sharper beneath it. "This was never yours alone," she said, "and it was never political." Her eyes held his for a moment longer, steady, deliberate, before shifting back to the projection. "If something built my empire," she continued, "then I will see it for myself." The palace lights adjusted subtly, brighter now, focused, as if acknowledging the decision. The coordinates remained, waiting, patient, unchanged. Ethan followed her gaze, and a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. Not amusement, not relief, but recognition. "Then we should not keep it waiting," he said. And somewhere far beyond the reach of their empire, something ancient and silent continued to hold those coordinates in place, as if it had always known that one day, someone would finally answer.